Rapterra is the latest roller coaster to open at King's Dominion as the long-awaited replacement for Volcano the Blast Coaster. Could this new ride live up to the legacy of the infamous inverted launch coaster? It sure is some large shoes to fill, or rather, a large space where there used to be a hollowed-out volcano. This is only the second launched wing coaster B&M have ever opened in America, and after the huge success of Thunderbird at Holiday World, could this newer version deliver as good or even better thrills? I'm Rollercoaster David, and this is my review of Rapterra at King's Dominion. Let's take a close look at the layout. After making a gentle turn to the right out of the station, you launch up a slight incline to a top speed of 65 miles per hour. You then pull up sharply into a hammerhead turn to the right that turns you around 180 degrees before swooping down and then upwards whilst inverting into an extended dive loop. At the bottom, you twist to the left, then to the right in an S-curved Airtime hill before rolling rapidly to the left and completing a tight turn, rising upwards towards the end into another heavily banked hill. You then roll to the right and continue into a long corkscrew before flying over a large Airtime hill. This sets you up for the ride's finale, where you dive down and enter a 360-degree Raptor roll. You then continue turning to the right in a heavily banked turn, before levelling out and entering the brake run to slow down. As you can see, it's a pretty interesting layout, but let's go back to the start and focus on that launch. With a top speed of 65 miles an hour, this is actually the fastest launch coaster B&M have ever built, and whilst the initial kick isn't as powerful as older hydraulic launches, the way the speed builds up as it hurtles towards the end of the track feels really impressive. In the front row especially. This is a really great launch and gets the ride off to an awesome start. The first element is also surprisingly interesting, and it almost reminds me of the hammerhead turns you get on spinning coasters. It feels remarkably different on either side of the coaster as well, with the outside of the turn giving some fun laterals on the left side as you yaw to the right, and on the inside of the turn you get some interesting hang time floater air as it twists. This is a really neat element for a wing coaster, and it kinda reminds me of an aerobatic stall turn that planes do. It works really well on this design of coaster, and I highly recommend you try it on both sides to experience the difference. The dive loop is also rather fun, and whilst I don't think it's quite as impressive to experience as it looked on initial renders of the ride, it does have a nice mix of forces and some airtime going into it, before the stronger positive G kicks in as you dive down to change direction. The twisted Airtime hill is another really fun element too, particularly in the front right seat, as the added rotation combined with the hill delivers stronger forces than you might expect. Coming out of this hill, however, there is a noticeable bit of shaking before the banked left turn, and this is probably the roughest section of the track. The banked Airtime hill is somewhat similar to the first element, albeit on a fairly smaller scale, but it kinda reminds me of a Stengel dive, similar to the one you get on Skyrush. The corkscrew that follows is nice and floaty as well, and the Airtime hill afterwards gives some decent airtime that's bordering on ejector, depending on where you're sitting, which is quite impressive for a B&M wing coaster. The final inversion that sends you into the ending flows neatly on from this Airtime hill, and overall I think the layout is really rather good. It's a great mix of elements that's got variety and a mix of forces, and it's well paced throughout. There's just one issue you probably already have heard of, and that's the rattle. As I mentioned previously, the worst part of the ride for roughness is the section after the twisted Airtime hill, and in general, any section with a strong positive Gs does deliver a bit of rattle. Your mileage may vary though with your own tolerance, and I know some people are highly critical of modern B&Ms being rather rattly, but I don't think it's enough to really detract from the ride. It may well be the case that B&M are now creating more dynamic rides with more rapid transitions and faster changes between forces, and the result is that you end up with some rattle. Wing coaster trains are solidly designed, but at the end of the day you're supporting a lot of weight away from the main section of track, and even with the best engineering in the world, you can't change the laws of physics or the properties of metal, so perhaps some shaking is inevitable. Maybe it comes down to a trade-off where you have to accept some shaking in order to have a more dynamic track layout, but it's certainly a factor that needs to be mentioned. Maybe roller coaster enthusiasts are just getting a bit soft these days, as no matter how much anyone complains about a rattle in this coaster, it's a million times smoother than the first wing coaster, Furious Baco. One thing that rather impressed me about Rapterra, however, was its theming. This was surprisingly detailed for an American coaster, and it fits really nicely into the new adventure area. There's now a real synergy between all the rides in this area, even extending to Flight of Fear, which has had a very minor makeover to add to the jungle theme. There's some nice large scenery pieces as well, such as a big bird statue where the left and right queues diverge, and the whole area is beautifully landscaped. It also seems like they've put real thought into the areas where you can view the coaster from, and you can get some really neat photos or videos if you explore a bit. One slight downside of the themed area, however, was the complete lack of shade in the queue. Although I wonder if this is a temporary thing, as there seems to be plenty of posts that look like they're designed to hold some sort of awning overhead, which should provide shade, although it's not been installed yet. The advantage of this was that it made filming the ride a lot easier, so maybe it's a tactical decision to install shade later and let people get lots of photos or videos for social media beforehand. The theming does impress though, and the consistent adventure theme is pulled off a lot better than many other parks. A good comparison here would be the Mandrill Mayhem coaster at Chessington World of Adventures, which has the Jumanji license. However, I think Rapterra's theming and the surrounding area are a much better fit for that IP. The one area that feels a little lacking in terms of theming, however, are the trains, which have a rather basic design. When you consider some of the awesome train designs that have featured on B&M wing coasters in the past, these triangular bits on the trains are slightly underwhelming. When so much detail has been put into other areas of the ride, this seems like a strange omission. Another slight disappointment is the lack of any scenery interactions, such as you get on the keyholing element on Gatekeeper, or the sign fly-throughs on Swarm. These near-miss elements work brilliantly on wing coasters, and it's a bit of a shame there aren't any such elements on Rapterra, although just like the Swarm, you never know that could be added later. To further immerse you in the adventure land, there's also some well-themed music and drum and animal sounds to make it feel a bit more exotic, which is a nice little touch. Operations of the ride were generally pretty good as well, although the day I visited it was fairly quiet. There didn't seem to be much downtime either due to technical reasons, although there was some downtime due to rather other human factors. On their website, King's Dominion described the ride's inversions as stomach churning, and whilst my stomach remained thoroughly unchurned when I rode it, that didn't seem to be the case for quite a few members of the general public, as it seemed like there was a disproportionate number of people losing their lunch after riding. This meant that the ride had a fair bit of downtime due to it being cleaned, and I did hear one unfortunate fellow claim that he never usually gets sick on roller coasters, in between unleashing a rainbow yawn into a nearby bin. Now, this could just be an unusually chunder-prone demographic that visited on the same day as me, but maybe there's something in the mixture of G-forces and shaking that isn't sitting quite well with those with less hardened stomachs. I'd be interested to know if anyone else who visits the park notices this, or if it was just a strange coincidence during my visit. As I say, I didn't experience any nausea on the ride, but these days after riding over 1,200 different coasters, it's pretty rare that I do. Comparing Rapterra to other wing coasters, the obvious competitor here is of course Thunderbird at Holiday World, and it's really quite close as to which one is my favourite. I think the launch on Rapterra is better, and it's got more dynamic pacing and elements. However, I remember Thunderbird feeling smoother, and as a result it had a better sense of flow through the track, and it also has some additional scenery interactions that do make a difference. There's only one other launched B&M wing coaster to compare to, and that's Mandrill Mayhem, and Rapterra is hands down the winner here, although they are being marketed as quite different demographics. I do think the launch element adds a lot to a wing coaster though, and I'd probably say that it stands out as better than the lift hill versions of the ride, but it's too close to call as to which one I prefer between this and Thunderbird. So overall, I think Rapterra is a pretty good ride. Sure, it's got some rattle that seems pretty much the new standard for modern B&M coasters, but I don't think it harms the ride that much. I personally preferred riding in the front, and in those seats it delivers a great thrilling ride that I think does make it a worthy successor to Volcano. Personally, I was never a huge fan of the old ride, and whilst the vertical launch was kind of cool, the rest of the layout was not that great and the inversions felt slow and uncomfortable. The inversions of Rapterra are much better than Volcano, and it's got a much more varied and interesting layout too, so I think the park has really built a winning coaster here. As always, I love hearing what you think of the ride in the comments, and if you agree with my thoughts on the controversial modern B&M Rattle. I've also recently launched a Fastlane Plus YouTube members area for this channel, where I've been experimenting with a few new video types and ideas, such as same-day park reports from recent trips, and I've got a bunch of other ideas for different types of content to share. If you'd like to support the channel and help it grow, then take a look, or tune into any live streams or premieres where I'll try and give away free memberships if I can figure out how. Anyway, hit that like button like it's a 65 mph launch, and keep an eye out for more reviews from my recent East Coast USA trip. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.